When the pressure is high and the energy low, that's when your business needs inspiration to change and to grow. It's also when true captains show up. Hi, I'm Mark Francis, and I'm the host of this podcast that invites industry leaders from all over the world to answer the question, who's your captain? When you need to motivate and to mobilize, to develop and enable your team. Whether you are new to being a leader or you aspire to be a captain, this podcast is for you. Welcome, everybody. And of course, I was always going to wear a designer shirt because I'm joined today by Lycia Lobo, who is the COO of the amazing Design Museum in London. Lycia, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
I'm really excited about this because your museum's amazing, and I'd like to invite and inspire more people to come visit, more people to be members and things like that. One of the things I love is it's dynamic and it's future orientated. Many museums are, here's the past, and your museum's always changing. So why do you think it's so special, the Design Museum?
I think, we're unique in many ways, but I think starting with why anyone really should care about a museum or a charity, in fact, which is what we are. I suppose they act really as a real powerful hub that's really accessible. I mean, we're free to enter, but of course we're not free to maintain. So I think for people to have a safe space to enjoy culture, to learn, to meet people, to just relax and I guess take them away from the kind of everyday. We all use devices or on screens, technologies around us. It's a great space to kind of just move away from that and learn about something that maybe you don't know about, or just create new memories, to be honest. And I think for us, where we're unique, and you touched on it in the intro, is the fact that we are looking forward. Who are the designers of tomorrow? How can we marry up aesthetics and functionality? Because that is the real difference between design and art. Art can look great. It can be very subjective, as can design. But design really needs to have a function. What does it do? What problem does it solve? And I think for us, we're constantly having those conversations at the museum. And it's just a great place to come and learn and hear more about it.
Well, you've got a standard exhibition, which is a must-see for everybody, which is about designer, maker, user. That's absolutely a must-see. But then it's constantly evolving, isn't it? Well, what you're putting on is always evolving, a bit like life itself. So how often, and this is a really poignant question, how often would you say people could visit and find something different every time they come?
Yeah, I think, your question is really timely. We will be hitting our 10-year anniversary this year in the new location on Kensington High Street. But actually, we're approaching our 40th year as a museum in 2029. And recently, we announced that we were extending our new collection gallery. So the designer maker user that you've just talked about. Designer maker user for me is really nostalgic. I've been visiting the museum from its previous location at Shad Thames to where it is now for almost 30 years. So most of my life, growing up, visiting, going to school, doing design, visiting as more of a kind of school trip. And I think for me, you are very much looking back. You're looking back at the evolution of design. When I think about the Apple Macs that are in the collection, or the Nokia phones. And when we opened, we created the crowdsource wall, which sits outside the entrance to designer maker user. And we went out to the community to ask them, what would they like to see? What do they think is the definition of good design, memorable design, nostalgic design? And we've got everything on there, from the underground sign to an IKEA bag to Burberry coat. So there is far ranging. And I think anybody that's visiting the museum for the first time, that's a must have on the top floor. You can see it as you enter the museum. It's a great conversation starter. It is a generation divider, I have to say. Not everyone recognises the Fisher-Price phone. And so, but it's a great conversation, whether it's a, grandparent with a grandchild, and talking about, what they remember from those designs. in the designer maker user itself, obviously we cover all ranges of disciplines from architecture to engineering, graphics, sort of digital world. And the 40th anniversary in 29 gives us that opportunity to rethink that space. So the plan is, in answer to your question, how regularly can you visit? We want people to come back that have visited us in the last 10 years, to come back both now and in 29 to see what changes we are now making. It's got over 1,000 items, 20th and 21st century kind of items on the crowdsource wall as well as in the collection. And we want to show more. We've got an archive downstairs, which isn't really visible to the public. We want to be able to display more items from that collection in the public space. So yeah, really exciting time to actually revisit the museum if you haven't visited in a while. The other thing is our dynamic programme. We're always putting on exhibitions, and we normally have at least 2 forms of exhibitions on at one time. And that may be in the form of a platform display or a sort of blockbuster exhibition that kind of focuses on a particular designer or period of time. So we've got Wes Anderson, the archives, which is around the filmmaker and director currently, and Nego also opened last Friday, which is all about the creative collection from the Japanese designer Nego.
That all sounds amazing, and well done. In just 5 minutes, you've definitely convinced me to visit the Design Museum. I'll show that a few times. That's mega. I'm also fascinated by the sort of contemporary. Getting a little slot in your diary has not been easy, because you've been at Milan Fashion Week. You're working on the current exhibition with Nego, who I know very well because I work with an amazing business called Penfolds Wine.
Yes.
And they've got Nego doing some amazing work with them. So I mean, I can't wait to see his exhibition. Tell us a little bit about your role, because Chief Operating Officer of a registered charity and a dynamic, growing, exciting museum. You must have so many hats. So just give us a flavour of some of the main priorities you have as a Chief Operating Officer.
Thank you. So I guess the practical side, exactly what do I do? So I cover the kind of main operations, the opening of the building safely and securely. So security, the cleaning teams, front of house operations, so retail and visitor experience assistants, and then obviously our income generating streams, so things like retail and food and beverage. I also oversee some of our infrastructure, so the IT team and the estates team, and with that comes any sort of capital programming as well. So the remit is broad. I'm sort of one of a handful of people on the exec that all cover different domains. And I think, we all have our own disciplines and own specialisms. But I think uniquely, as an exec, what we're here to do is actually lead and inspire. So it's not just about the everyday. It's about how do we become ambassadors across the sector? How do we continue the great kind of the PR and press elements that our brilliant marketing and comms team do? How do we constantly be an advocate for what we do? And today is just one example of that. It's really important that we look outside our sector as well. And one of the reasons we were at Milan Design Week, a couple of us were out there being inspired by other great designers across the world. And I think, our role, yes, is to hit visitor numbers, hit a number of KPIs, make sure the museum is here in 5, 50, 500 years' time in whatever shape or form that might be. But it's also about getting the message and the mission and vision of the work that we do out there, so that more people visit, more people engage with us, more people enjoy what we do, and ultimately contribute to the future sustainability, whether it's financially or through kind of ambassador work of the museum.
That's fascinating. And how do you prioritize between the day-to-day operation, which is significant? You've just laid that out. On a daily basis, there's lots that you have to oversee. How do you balance your time between the have-to-do operation day-to-day and issues that come up by surprise, with being incredibly strategic and thinking about 5 years, 50 years, 500 years? How do you balance your diary in that way?
discipline and organization. I think, you have to be disciplined, and sometimes you have to say no. I think that's always hard, because I think the nature of what we do, you want to say yes, you want to involve everyone. Sometimes it is difficult. But ultimately, it's about making sure there is a shared understanding of the roles within the organization and how best we can all use our time. So you've got your roles, and you've obviously got your strengths and kind of where people are best placed. So there's a bit of a divide and conquer between the exec of how do we best place our time. But I think, it comes with experience and knowing that where we place most of our value is obviously being very clear on the direction of the museum, always forward looking, not always looking back, making sure we're several steps ahead, so that not only can we stay I guess ahead of any competitors that we might think we have, but it's also about making sure that we've got the capacity and the agility to respond to anything that might be last minute. You may get an inquiry about a really great partnership, and you think, well, we've planned for the next sort of 18 months. How do you kind of leverage that opportunity whilst not sort of dropping the ball elsewhere? I think it's worth saying all museums, whatever their scale or size, are under-resourced, and we've got to keep a tight rein on resourcing and our expenditure, and that can provide a challenge when you want to be agile. So we do work with a lot of brilliant freelancers, people on sort of shorter term contracts, and actually that's where we can kind of leverage that expertise or additional resource as we need. And actually I don't think we could have run the museum without both them and actually our volunteers. A lot of people don't know we've got a great cohort of volunteers that work for us on a kind of voluntary basis, and they're brilliant. And I think these are kind of the different things that we do versus maybe a corporate company that can really I guess help and enable us to have the time, the thinking space as an exec to look forward, look at how we may want to, I don't know, expand our international reach, be present in different places, and so forth.
Really cool. And from our previous discussion, Lycia, I got a lovely flavour for how the museum is growing, both in terms of memberships and visitor numbers and the type of exhibitions, relatively new buildings, still very modernist buildings. So the building's part of the experience. Loads of things you're getting right. What's the vision now for Design Museum? What's your vision for the organisation now?
Well, the vision, the outward vision, the external vision that we share with everyone is that, we need to be, I guess, a space where we enable this planet and the inhabitants of the planet to thrive. And we're very clear on our mission, and I think we're really good at trying to stick to our mission, which is basically to be a global hub for the transformative potential of design. So what is the real potential of design, and how can we be looking forward and not being a catch-all of everything to do with the design, but put spotlights on design at the appropriate time. So for us, that's kind of our anchor in terms of mission and vision. But ultimately, as I said earlier, we want to be here in 50 years' time. So for us, our clear kind of priorities are around sustainable, finances, building brand reputation and health, making sure that we're partnering with the right people that can help us get there. And ultimately just being a really exciting, fun and enjoyable place to kind of work or volunteer, so that actually by default your employees, volunteers, your freelancers become extensions and kind of advocates of, I guess, the vision and mission. But for us, it's, I don't think in this next phase, we truly know the answer. So when we get to 29, yes, that'll be a key moment, right? 40 years, key moment. But I don't actually know what it looks like beyond that. And I think that's something we are grappling with at the moment. And I think thinking back over the last 5, 6 to 10 years, a lot has changed. We've had a pandemic, we've had Brexit, a lot of kind of political uncertainty and change. Funding landscape has become more challenging. International giving is as well more challenging. And I think everyone's doing everything better. All museums across the landscape are just upping their game. They're elevating their offer. So almost the goalposts and the benchmarking moves, right? So you can think, all right, we're really clear on our mission and vision now, but actually, will that sustain us going forward beyond 29? So I think right here, right now, you're talking to me at a really exciting time, because I don't fully have the answer. And I think that's our role as exec, working with our board of trustees and other stakeholders to try and answer that question. So, if you've got any thoughts or ideas, what we should look like beyond 29, let us know.
I love that. And well, I'm going to visit in the next couple of weeks, and I'm going to bring along, I've got a beautiful granddaughter. I just think she would be inspired by the building, by the exhibitions, and I'll give you feedback after I've visited in a couple of weeks. So
and head up to that crowdsource wall and see how much she recognises.
Yeah, that is really cool. It's like, yeah, you must know that. I know, maybe you don't at your age. So yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. So
Great.
I'd love to ask you about how you galvanize your resources, because you gave us a lovely flavor for the multifarious nature of all the things that need to happen to make the museum run on a daily basis. So there's lots of different roles. How do you galvanize that whole team, be they permanent staff or contractors, to follow the mission, to bring more passion than just do your job? How do you do that? How do you galvanize the team?
Yeah, really good question. And again, it's difficult. It does involve discipline, rhythm, and rigor. And I think, our deputy director is really good at the rhythm and rigor bit around communication. So everything has to start with good communication and clarity. And I think if you've got that from the start, you can be a little bit more forgiving if, something's missed, right? So a good starting point for a healthy organization is having good communication, healthy rigor, and clarity. And I think for us, we're really good as an organization of doing sort of all staff meetings regularly, management, so sort of head of department level and upwards, meetings every month. So we're kind of sharing where we are on the programming, but also other key updates around the organisation. We all sit predominantly, the office team anyway, predominantly sit in an open office. So it's much easier to have those conversations. And obviously the museum is the anchor, right? It's the shared space. It's the kind of shared area that we all kind of working towards the same goal to improve and thrive and so forth. So for us, that's kind of one element. You've then got other internal stakeholders. So other members of staff, front of house, our third parties, whether it be our food and beverage caterer or security. You've also got your trustees and your subcommittees to the board. So obviously we meet regularly with them, as you would expect with any board. They're a very involved and engaged board. And I think we're incredibly lucky to have the group of trustees that we have had and have. And they all play their part with their own specialisms and contacts, and are extremely generous with their time. So I think we're all working towards the same shared goal. And I think because we're all clear on that, I think it makes it a lot easier to engage with all of those internal stakeholders, whether it's on an ad hoc basis, more informally, or in a more formal basis. Ultimately, our role is to do the very best that we can, to bring out the very best in people, and for people to feel that they can contribute effectively to make change and deliver against what they've got to deliver. Ultimately, that doesn't always go perfectly or swimmingly. There are always challenges and risks that come up. So being able to talk to your stakeholders in a sort of non-blame fashion or culture is incredibly important for an organisation to thrive and grow. How do we learn from what we've done? How do we continually improve on what we do? How do we elevate the offer that we're trying to give to our visitors? How do we listen to visitor feedback? How do we listen to sort of local stakeholder feedback in the community, take it on board, evolve and develop? And then there's the wider group. So I've touched on visitors. I've touched on the local community on Kensington High Street, and I guess the sort of West London area that we're in. But there's also our funders. There's also our members, our patrons. And I think all of it comes down to how we communicate with them, how we engage, and how do we maintain relations with them. We've got a brilliant Director of Development and Strategic Partnerships, Nancy, and she is brilliant at maintaining a lot of those relationships. She comes with long-standing relationships with a lot of them anyway, funders particularly. But I think, she's really good at galvanising and working with our trustees to maintain those relationships, invite them to private views, meet with them for a coffee chat. And I think ultimately, back to kind of how we work, you've got to be disciplined, but you've got to work well as a team to be able to kind of function and thrive as an organisation.
Getting a lovely picture as you describe it, Lycia, of a rhythm. You talk about rhythm, and it really triggered with me because such a dynamic organisation with a lot of moving pieces in terms of staff and resourcing has to establish a rhythm where it's seamless. It's seamless for the experience of people visiting because everyone behind the scenes and in front of the customer is doing such an amazing job. A rhythm, and that the role is also to elevate that wherever we can, is to say there's a core rhythm and how can we make the experience even better. I'd love to ask you about trustees, and I'll tell you why. It's probably because some people aren't involved in organizations where trustees play a role. I have the great privilege of working with the Children's Trust, an amazing charity in Tadworth. And I facilitated a meeting last week with the senior leadership team and the trustees. And it was a magic moment when I said, we're talking about a transition project that the trust is trying to drive. And I said, put your hand up in the room if you have commercial business experience of project management, because I think this is needed in this project. And of the 18 people in the room, more than half of whom were trustees, I reckon there must have been at least 50% who went, yeah, I've got loads of experience of that. I said, wow, that the trustee group brings competence and expertise that can bring value. So my question to you is, for those who don't know anything about trustees, what role do the trustees play in the design museum?
Yeah, really good question. I think there's the expected role that they play around governance, which is really important. So overseeing the kind of strategic direction and good governance of the organisation, everything from, risk and finances, etc. And as I said earlier, we have separate sort of committees that oversee those specialist areas, whether it's innovation or curatorial content, finances, enterprise, etc.
Yeah.
Then the other role, which I think is in some ways more important, right, is the contribution they make in a physical presence. So the fact that they are available, visible at private views, constantly connecting us with contacts they have, brand ambassadors, both nationally and internationally. Many of our trustees do work internationally as well as part of their own roles or connections. And I think also just being just a brilliant group of trustees that you can talk to and, confide in if you've got a challenge, and how do you kind of throw it about and get some great solutions or ideas of how to take it forward, and trustees aren't there to tell the exec what to do, but they are there to help inspire and connect and ensure that we stretch ourselves, I guess, and push boundaries and make sure that I guess we're ready and we're still here for the next generation of exec and trustees, and I think that's super important. And as I said, we're very lucky that we've got a really broad complement of trustee skill sets across the trustee cohort, and they work again equally to the exec, work brilliantly together to leverage those different expertise when's needed.
Yeah, I love the choice of word, the complement, isn't it? Because yes, of course, there's a sort of legalese around the trustees around oversight and governance. But the real value is also around roll your sleeves up when we need your help, advice, ambassadorial in any context. I love that. I love that dual role in a sense. So how do you now, the next phase I'd love to take this discussion on is about developing, I'm going to say people, but it's also about how you do what you do. So it's about the competence of the museum and its staff. How do you develop, because you talked about elevate from rhythm, what's the development strategy of your resources?
Yeah, really good question. And I think we're on a journey, like many organisations, on this. As you know, I'm fairly new. I mean, I don't know if I can say that anymore. I'm 15 months in, but um, we have a brilliant sort of people team, but that's only one side of development. Development comes from managers, individuals wanting to develop themselves, and I think ultimately there's kind of a couple of facets here. So the first one is recruitment and making sure we're recruiting not only for skill set but for behaviors and people with the kind of aligned attitude to what we need within an organization. I think also we think about recruitment, particularly in bigger teams, of how does a skill set or an individual maybe complement other skill sets within the team. What are we missing? So that's kind of the first point. And then it's kind of making sure we're really clear with those people that join us, kind of what the expectations are of them and what their expectations, I guess, of working for us are. We're a multi-generational workforce with obviously volunteers, and by the nature of that, I mean, we've got quite a young workforce in some ways, is to make sure that people are getting what they need from the role and feel that they can really thrive and be their best selves at work. And that doesn't always come naturally for people, particularly if they're sort of taking on a bigger remit than maybe what they're used to, or they are changing roles slightly, or in a different culture that maybe they've been into before. We are far more agile than a lot of other museums and galleries in terms of decision making. So I think ultimately, for development, we work with our teams. So managers work with teams and actually look at individual development and how we can support. I'm a huge advocate of development because it allows you to not only grow in the workplace, but actually grow personally as well as an individual. And huge advocate of having a mentor, particularly if you're a senior leader or above, having somebody that you can just talk to, that you trust, and that can again challenge your thinking is hugely important. I think there's all the kind of stuff that you would expect through like training and things that you can give, whether it's from difficult conversations to your NEBOSH training, right? Like there's all different types of training for both hard and soft skills. So we obviously offer as much of that as we can. We have some brilliant carbon literacy training, which is actually led by one of our heads of department, so that we have almost all our staff that are fully carbon literate. I mean, there's great little initiatives like that we run internally, and actually our staff own it. The more that our staff can own their own development, but also helping move the organisation forward in leading things like this, I think is brilliant. So I think it comes in all shapes and sizes. We're on a journey. We're constantly learning from other people, but it is a focus for us going forward. How can we make sure that people feel that they're engaged and developed and learning and thinking about continuous improvement and development?
I love this because my organization is called Uspire. We're all about education. One philosophy we have, you've reflected, which is leader as educator. So you said right at the start of your answer, you said, well, the manager plays a key role. And I absolutely believe in that if you have a manager that sees their role as enabling and developing their team, you create an environment of growth. It's inevitable. If the manager is just doing a really good job at task management, that's good because it's a rhythm, but it isn't elevating. It isn't developing. It isn't growing the spirit, the motivation, and the skill of the team. How do you develop your managers? So this is manager as educator, coach. What support do you give them for that?
Well, you touched on their coaching, I think, is imperative. So I think you're always developing any conversation, meeting, one-to-one that you might have. You're always sort of supporting and coaching. I think for me, a really good question that I advise managers to do is actually ensure that their manager is asking them, what support can I give you? Because it's very easy for a manager to look at another manager or a team member and think, oh, I think I know what they need. And actually flip it on its head, and ask your managers or your team members, what support do you think you need from me or others? And I think that opens up a completely different conversation. So one of the things that I do when I'm coaching managers that might be having some challenges or difficulties is actually ask from those individuals, okay, what support would help you? How can we better improve our working relationship to ensure that we both get the best out of what we do? And I think ultimately, um, when people thrive and do well, it's a different type of coaching to those that are still learning and developing and have got challenges. So I think there's two ways to look at it. It's kind of managers that are excelling and are kind of looking for that next step. I really encourage them to think about their networks. Networking at a senior level is super important. And I think the gap between a manager and, say, a head of or a director is much bigger than people think. And I think people in those roles still think it's about how great their work is that they deliver. It's not about those softer skills around inspiration or influencing or resilience. And I think for me, you build those skills through your networks. You learn from other people. You learn from other people that have been there and are on their own journey. And I think for me, that's probably the biggest bit of advice I give managers that are ready for that next step. Broaden your networks, talk to people. I had a brilliant manager, Alex Stitt, many years ago. He won't mind me saying this. And one of our first meetings, he said to me, when he was in a former role, if he wasn't sort of out networking at that level or doing something at least sort of once a week or once every other week or something, then actually he's not doing an element of his job. And I really remember that. I mean, it was years ago, probably 10 years ago now, he said that to me, but it was something that I still remember today. And I think at that moment, some sort of penny dropped and I was like, yeah, I need to really consider this and think about how I broaden my networks. So it's a piece of advice I give people still today, and many of my teams, past and present, are now doing that. They're broadening their networks and expanding their knowledge and contacts.
Yeah, and a couple of key things you mentioned in that is find a mentor, be a mentor, and coach. And I like to articulate very explicitly the difference. A mentor has done it and can share their experience, so they can be a model for you, whereas a coach just asks amazing questions to bring out the answers that you already have, but perhaps aren't aware of, and just need that sounding board to ask the right question. So coach, mentor, fundamentally different roles, but both critically important. I'd love to turn the lens back onto COO of a registered charity, and an amazing one which everyone should visit, called the Design Museum. And in your 15 months, you mentioned that relatively short but incredibly busy time frame. What can you reflect on when you think, I did that and I think that was the right thing to do, it's made a difference? What are the big make a difference elements of what you've done as Chief Operating Officer?
I think this being kind of, I don't know now, my third sort of exec director role, you learn a lot from your previous roles. And as many probably listening to this will know, that I went from a much larger organisation to this consciously, because I wanted to give more time to my trustee roles. And I guess there were some key things that I did very early on when I joined, which were hugely important and have now sort of started to sort of pay off, not just financially, but in terms of, back to that kind of structure, rhythm and future planning. So it was get your strategy on order. So this is kind of how strategy, Transformation 29 kind of was born, working with the exec on making sure we've got a clear plan between now and 29, with a couple of kind of anchors. We call it the kind of internally, we call it the heart and lungs. There's a few different projects going on, with the new collection gallery being the heart, and then our sort of ground floor refurbishment being one of the lungs, and then our outdoor area with the garden area being another one. So it's really easy to kind of articulate it. And our strategy is basically 4 main pillars. It's looking at audience development, understanding our audiences and making the most of it. The second is commercial transformation, so elevating our commercial offer, becoming a destination. And then the 2 programs that sort of help sit under it. So the building program, which is made up of the new collection gallery and elements of commercial transformation, with the shop and cafe refurbishment And then lastly is our digital transformation program. So early on, we set those key priorities up for the next 3 to 4 years, which made it then easy for me to then work with a consultant, Rod Barlow, on digital transformation and the internal teams of what does digital transformation look like? What are our burning platforms? What do we need to replace? What do we need to just optimize better? So it was setting out that roadmap and getting the funding for it, because the minute you've got a plan and the funding, actually, the deliverables are difficult in terms of time and energy and resource, but actually it's the slightly easier part than going out for funding because you've got more control over it.
Yeah.
We've done the same with building. We've done the same with commercial transformation. We've done the same with audience development. So anyone looking at our website, there's plenty of different tenders on our website, all on the transformation page. But I think for all of us as an organisation, my role and my priorities was to make sure that we're all aligned as an exec on those key transformation pillars so that we deliver. Ultimately, they are just the infrastructure. They are pillars that help us catch up. We're a little bit behind, when I think about digital. We've only just put in donation boxes, so that's something we're really proud of. Several teams work together to get those donation boxes in, whether it's someone designing the actual design of them, it's then getting the IT and it's set up, it's then sorting out the contract. And it's great, really obvious, but we hadn't done it yet. So something immensely proud of, alongside setting up the strategy, and obviously supporting and getting the funding for some of these things. So getting the funding for our first phase of digital, getting some of the funding for the building works. We all played our part in, helping to contribute towards that. So for us, they're key milestones. And I think with anything that you do, you also think about some of the real fun times, the really exciting things we've done. So last year, unplanned, but we did a collaboration with Harlan Miller, where we launched a number of limited edition products, which really bolstered our finances last year. So that was really great. We also had a partnership with Network Rail, where we did a pop-up at London Bridge. Again, unplanned, impromptu, but made sense. Again, contributed to our finances. And then we did a couple of other sort of partnerships along the way that were out of our sort of core exhibition program partnership. So Conran Shop, we did a little pop-up for 6 weeks in one of our stores. And as I said, we recently launched a Nike Nego Air Force One sneaker drop. That was last Friday. And again, it's something different. It's something new. We've really elevated how we partner with people. We became a destination last Friday for people who were willing to queue to get hold of these trainers.
Amazing.
Place you could get hold of them on that Friday. So for us, we're always thinking of how can we do better? How can we do more? How can we do something more exciting? And I think, back to our very first question of how do you juggle and prioritize all this, you've just got to be super disciplined and organized and know when to say no, or know when to move something or reprioritize, and be able to delegate, be able to let go. I think it's very easy as you move up to want to hold on to the fun stuff, but ultimately you've got to let go and trust your team and people to lead from the front as well.
Thank you, Lycia, because what you've just done in the last sort of 3 or 4 minutes is absolutely describe how a great chief operating officer balances strategy with application and the day-to-day. So early on in your tenure, here's the strategy, right? So it's set the pillars, absolute clarity of that, communicate it, which is the thinking, the cerebral, the let's get the future right. And then what does that mean in terms of application? And in the last minute or so, all of the lovely things that you are doing, creating queues around the corner for the museum, which is a major move forward in terms of how you're doing what you're doing, the output and great news. But actually it comes from a strategic intention when you first start. So it's a lovely section, which frankly, as an educator, with your permission, I would share that with anyone who says, I'm just about to become a COO. How do I do that? Well, you've got to balance strategy with the operation, and you've got to be, and this is your word again, you've got to get the rhythm right in how we do what we do on a day-to-day basis. And you've got to take that rhythm to an elevated place so that in 2029, you're even more successful than you are in 2026. So brilliant little segue, which I'm definitely going to edit and with your permission share. Fantastic. and the question was, what are you most proud of in terms of environment now? What are you most proud of? Because it is, as Chief Operating Officer, you're so central to how we feel as a member of the team making the museum amazing. What are you most proud of in terms of the environment within the museum itself?
Oh, ultimately, I think even before the environment, the number one thing I'm most proud of is how resourceful and how collaborative our people have been. That has to be above anything else. I guess in terms of the environment, it's also, again, the culture that we're developing, the fact that we're renewing our spaces 10 years on, to enable it to be more fresh. But if I can actually use something else, which a lot of people might not know about, which I think we're all incredibly impressed and excited about in terms of what's kind of happened over the last sort of year or so, is an installation we did actually off-site down the road from the Design Museum.
Didn't know that.
It's part of a research program. So we've got a sort of research department within the organisation called Future Observatory. And they built something called the Stone Demonstrator, which is basically a low carbon construction prototype, which basically puts sort of pre-tensioned stone building techniques to the test. It went up very quickly. It's based at the Empress Place development at Earl's Court, which is a development site at the moment. There's a few other bits there. You can go and see it. The public can just go and see it. It's like a 3-story building with no windows or what have you, but it's really impressive. And you think, with everything else going on High Street Kensington, we've got a brilliant research department that's managed to do that. And for me, that's something we're incredibly proud of. One of my team members played a small but integral part in supporting with the lease and all the kind of practical elements around safety. But ultimately, we take the wins as an organisation together, and I think it's something that we are all incredibly proud of. And again, comes back down to people, doesn't it? People with the ideas, people executing it, and people making it happen. So, yeah.
Designer, maker, user.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna. That's a lovely moment in any of the podcasts I do, which is who's your captain. You're the captain in that sense, but you're also delegating and inspiring other captains to take ownership within the organisation. Yeah. I use ChatGPT and I asked this simple question of all of my guests. And it is this: what makes Lycia Lobo so special? And these are the first three answers. There are actually 5 that come up for you, which is more than most. But this is what they say. I'd love to get your feedback about the feedback about you. Number 1, strong commercial leadership. So it's interesting, isn't it? Because you're in a charity, but actually you've articulated beautifully. We need to generate funding to survive. So there's a key commercial part. So strong commercial leader, cross-sector experience, broad stakeholder influencer. And again, you mentioned that stakeholder point earlier about the multifarious stakeholders you've got. So commercial leadership, cross-sector experience, and broad stakeholder influencer. Does that sound anything like you?
I hope so. And really interesting thing you did there. You never know what might come out of AI, do you? So, yeah, I mean, commercial is like the obvious, right? I've been doing this a long time. Did I know I would go down this route? No. But since a very young age, working in my father's shops, I've always loved working with people and in this kind of environment of retail and hospitality. So I think it was probably inevitable, and I've probably got a gene there somewhere from my father. So, to then go and progress to be a kind of sector leader in this industry, it's something I'm incredibly proud of. And people along the way, whether it's line managers or connections or networks, have helped shape me, hopefully to be a better leader. And, incredibly grateful to all of those people who have played their part along the years. But yeah, I do have a lot of cross-sector experience. I started my career on the high street. I think, it's a really good grounding place for learning the principles of being a retailer or a hospitality outlet. And, I learned well, again, some brilliant leaders. I remember having a phenomenal head of HR when I was at Thornton's, lady called Jo, and she's still in the HR and people sector, and Sharon, who's one of my line managers back then, and I learned brilliantly quite young. So I'm very fortunate and couldn't be any more grateful. And I think influencing comes with time, right? Everyone's got different influencing styles, and I think it's important to recognise that. And I feel that I've honed my influencing style. It might be that I'm not the most, I guess, knowledgeable or articulate person in the room, but I build relationships. And for me, that's more important, that people build trust in me as an experienced commercial leader. And I think that's how I like to influence people. I like to influence people through trust and belief, successes, deliverables, and that works for me. And I think there's an important message there that not every leader needs to be an extrovert or the loudest person in the room or the most articulate. You just need to bring your vision to life, your message to life in your own way. And I think that's super important for anybody that wants to progress their career, that there isn't a kind of one leader fits all. Leaders come in all sort of shapes and sizes. And I think it's important to hone your own USP, what's special about you.
What a fantastic way to complete this discussion. Absolutely inspirational, Lycia. Thank you so much for your time. And thank you for being a captain of an amazing museum, which I think everyone in the world should visit, which is the Design Museum. So a huge thank you.
Thank you.